All right, welcome everybody to episode 38 of the Inglorious Bastards campaign. With us today, we have Jerry Snook, the community manager from Standing Stone Games, and Chris Pierson, the lead world builder and lore coordinator, also from Standing Stone Games. So welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having us here.
Great. So these guys are local Massachusetts people like me. Now everybody in the world knows where I'm podcasting from. And I, as everybody knows at this point, I have a few questions to ask our guests. Generally, they revolve around either Dungeons and Dragons or Tolkien. And obviously, for the interview with Jacob Rogers and for these guys, we're going to be asking specifically about the products that they've been instrumental in creating. And in this case, this is Lord of the Rings Online. Woohoo! I wanted some fanfare, like drum roll, expected it in the background. So I guess we'll start with either of you. You guys can kind of chime in as you want to. But I am curious about the company, Standing Stone Games. So if you give us a little history of the company, where you're located, and anything you want to talk about.
Sure. The history is actually pretty long and involves, people going back into the 90s, essentially, which I can't personally speak to.
Oh, I can.
But you can to quite some extent here. Largely, the elevator pitch, I guess, would say is that the Lord of the Rings Online was born out of Middle-earth Online. And that was born out of a desire from a group of Brown University and other people back in the 90s to really just kind of make it happen.
Well, yeah, I mean, Turbine, which was the company that Standing Stone spun off of in the end of 96? 2016, sorry,
yep.
96. I started it there in 96. It was founded in Rhode Island by, like Jerry said, a bunch of Brown students primarily in 1994, and not long after moved to Massachusetts, to Westwood, Massachusetts, which is where it was when I joined it. And we did our first project was one of the first massively multiplayer online games, Asheron's Call. Which ran for a good, I want to say 13 years.
No, it was way more than that. AC
that.
was about 20, right?
No, it wasn't. Was it? I guess it
was
might have
close.
been. Yeah, it might have been close to 20 years.
Yeah.
Starting in 99, I think. Is when
okay, so that would have been about 16
years. Yeah, that sounds more like it.
Yeah.
So this is a long and storied history here. This is great.
Yeah, it's really part of that early crop of kind of vanguard online video games, along with, say your Ultimas and EverQuest and things like that. Asheron's Call, those two in particular predated us, but it was part of that same wave that kind of hit the scene.
Yeah, I mean, EQ only predated us by about 6 months, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, we were definitely part of the first wave of trying to figure out how these things even worked. And then after Asheron's Call, we did Asheron's Call 2. And then we sort of, we'd been looking around for other properties to work with. Asheron's Call had been our own thing, and it was Vivendi Universal at the time was the rights holder or the game publisher for Lord of the Rings based stuff, and we wound up working with them to make what it started out as Middle-earth Online, and then it changed a few times. Vivendi moved on, and we primarily work with the Saul Zaentz company, who are the rights holders for the for media based on Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. And we developed Lord of the Rings Online based on that, and it came out in 97. And we also at the same time have been doing
2007.
Sorry, 2007.
What decade is it again?
No, it's I understand, but you're exactly right. So, but I mean, it largely just came out of, in the wake of Asheron's Call and Asheron's Call 2, what next?
Yeah.
You'd already, to some extent, the group there had proven that they could do that kind of scope.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know clearly your passion, at least to some extent, is Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, I mean, my passion for Tolkien was partly born out of working on the game, frankly, and having to really delve into the research on it. I mean, I'd read it a few times and had been through a few of the supplemental texts, but I didn't really become enmeshed in Tolkien to the obscene extent that I am now until basically I had to do it for my job.
Can I ask?
And we also Turbine and later Standing Stone after we spun off from Turbine also do Dungeons and Dragons online.
That's right.
Same time,
That's right.
So.
Yeah. Well,
It's really interesting to see, a studio of, let's say in the kind of late 90s to early 2000s time, be able to secure two big IP licenses like that and be able to deliver in a way that, one of our goals for as long as we've been around is to do our best to do it right on this kind of stuff, right? On both Dungeons and Dragons and Lord of the Rings, we've always wanted to be as authentic as we can, and so the ability to it's a mix of, what do they call it? Mix of luck and skill and planning and execution.
Yes.
So.
Well, can I ask you? You mentioned getting really immersed into the world of Tolkien and wanting to do it right, and I think just based on my use of your materials and in our campaign, the maps and the place names and the people names, it's just really well done. And I wonder, sort of, for people that aren't behind the curtain, what is that like? And what kind of freedom do you have to fill in the whole? Because I think that's one of the things that Tolkien did so well, is he left these gaps in the lore and the histories and the mythologies, and that left us wondering, right? Well, where are the Entwives? Like, where did the hobbits come from? Like, what happened to that sword after the fall of Gondor? All of those things. Like, how much license do you have, and where do you get your ideas?
Well, I can share this. We have a fair bit of license to extrapolate. That's the word I'm looking for. To extrapolate from the texts, specifically from Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, because of rights issues. Stuff like the Silmarillion and Unfinished Tales is not part of our purview, so we have to be careful not to intrude on that. But aside from that, and having to and respecting just the spirit and the themes of the work of Tolkien's work, we have fairly free reign to hang our own stuff on it, and it's so there's huge blank areas on the maps that we've been able to and we're continuing to fill in both entire areas, and then filling in details in places that the Fellowship did not necessarily directly interact with.
And one of the things we've tried to do, even when doing that, is stay within the scope of the writing when we can, and things like that too. So you don't see all of a sudden pink elephants and things like that you might see. I only bring that up because we, even though we are in some ways charting our own course, we also make sure that the players are experiencing kind of the core story. Maybe not as you're not playing Aragorn, you're not playing Gandalf, but you're experiencing the events with your own character, just not directly standing next to these people for the most part.
Yeah, we definitely try to bump up against the books and the characters and locations from the books wherever we can, but also bringing in all of the who are the other Rangers in the Grey Company besides Albarad. We never got any names in the book.
That's right.
Who are the who are the other commanders in Sauron's armies? Where are all these Rohirrim that we hear the names of when after they're killed at the Battle of Pelennor? What was their deal? So he both leaves little hooks that you can flesh out, and he leaves just expanses that you get to color in as well. And you mentioned names on the maps. That's a large. Cracking the whole naming thing in Tolkien was a huge part of being able to do this. And it's been really helpful that around the time that we started developing it, the community, the linguistic community for Tolkien invented languages really started to flourish. And the resources that are available now for doing Sindarin are just ridiculous compared to what they were back when we started. And there's I have people that I know online who've been able to help me with Kuzdul, and with I've had some stuff translated into Old English for the Rohirrim, and like Gothic for the Wood Folk, and all the other, and then being able to pull in other languages for cultures that he barely touches on linguistically, but being able to figure out what their approximate equivalent would be in the real world. Like for the Dunlendings, we have one word in their language, but it's a kind of a Celtic sounding word. So all the hill folk wound up pulling in different aspects of a bunch of different Celtic languages, because their relationship with the Rohirrim is kind of similar to how the Celts and the Anglo-Saxons sort of didn't get along in early English history. So there's a lot of stuff like that where we have to think. We have to think ahead about what we're going to do. A lot of fantasy you can particularly. I don't want to cast aspersions on D&D, but D&D much more freewheeling when it comes to stuff like that.
Right.
Whereas Tolkien was, language was his thing. So that's one of the things that we've tried to respect.
Well, we're gonna. You mentioned the hill folk, and I'll bring them up again later. This is one of the one of the resources that I used for our campaign early on. But I just wanted to comment that when you can get a name to work, and I use all those resources that you're mentioning, the Elf Dictionary, right, online, where you can do all the different languages. I mean, when a name works and it has meaning, it's a great formula. Do you have any particular name that you're responsible for that you're super proud of? Like, what's the where did the name and the history and the story sort of blend together perfectly for you?
Oh boy. Well, I mean, recently I've really enjoyed with the working with Kuzdul in that regard. I find it's a really evocative, different language for they've done so much Sindarin that at this point not any one Sindarin name really stands out, but being able to come up with this is the Hall of Thikilgundu in the Grey Mountains, or Yarnfast is actually in Norse because it's the other dwarf language, but in the Iron Hills. Those have been really fun to do. I've enjoyed a lot of our more recent villains. Tend to be on the Black Numenorian side, so being able to work with Adunaic has been really fun. Coming up with names like Dulgabeth, the Black Word, and Uthrakor, the Captain of the Pit, and all these very much more guttural sounding names has been a lot of fun.
And so, do you have somebody on your team that works primarily with the languages?
That's me.
That's you.
You're looking at it.
Very much me. I took like an introduction to linguistics course in college, and so that sort of sparked an interest for me, and I was the only one at the time when we first started with any kind of linguistics training at all. So I immersed myself in all of that. I'd been a big fan of Old English since college as well. So I basically became the person who I used to joke that I taught myself Sindarin. That's not really true. Sindarin, but I definitely I read David Sallow's book cover to cover, his introduction to Sindarin when it first came out, I actually read it on my honeymoon, which,
Ooh.
yeah, well, it's fine. My wife was reading her own thing. But it was, I just always enjoyed the linguistic end of things, and it can be pretty intimidating for other people. So I sort of have kept that mantle ever since.
Got it.
For going on how many years now?
Well, you mentioned community and the community of resources that have really sort of taken off, and I would guess that the movies helped with that in some ways and bastardized it in other ways. But so talking about the community, you have people like me, lowly podcast makers who probably contact you regularly to share and to borrow ideas. But have you noticed any overlap with some of the media or the publications of various organizations? Have the people from I think it's Netflix or Amazon? I think Amazon is producing the new show coming up. Has anyone reached out from the community to sort of draw on your resources?
Typically, something that would be a corporate endeavor like the Amazon thing. They're going to work on their own kind of walled garden, so to speak, and we're not directly related to them. I would imagine they probably would not reach out to us.
I would,
at the same time, sure, we have had opportunities, I'm sure, over the years where people have they recognize the knowledge on the team and have said, hey, can you help me with this or this pronouncer or things like that. So while it may be a less formal relationship than you would see in kind of a business relationship, I'm sure that that's happened for various reasons over the years.
I've personally done some consulting for other games, for instance, that we're working with the Saul's Ants company for under their umbrella, just to share expertise and get their input on things and give them advice as well. But otherwise, I'd say most of our interaction with people outside of our specific sphere has been with the scholarly community. I don't know if you know Michael Drought. He's a Tolkien scholar who lives in the Boston area, and he teaches down at Wheaton College. I became friends with him very early on in the process, and I've involved him from time to time. We do webcasts with him and with Corey Olson.
Oh yeah,
who I know you're going to be interviewing in the next month. I often bounce ideas off of the two of them to get their input or ask them questions about things that I can't quite puzzle out myself, like why wasn't Boromir married, or things like things like that really are interesting, like almost like things that it seems like Tolkien either forgot about or neglected on purpose, depending on how you look at it.
That's awesome. All those existential, really important questions. All right, so let's move back to talking about Lord of the Rings Online, and if you could, give kind of a high level description of what gameplay is like, and maybe what the plot is, or the overarching goal for the people who might be looking to experience the game.
With MMOs, it's always a little tricky to say what's the one thing you're supposed to do, right? Because it tends to be enjoy the game is really the ultimately what it is. But what we tend to find is the Lord of the Rings Online, for the most part, we have flashbacks and things, but for the most part takes place during the War of the Ring. And we are following the events of that activity through our own characters and places and people, and then coming together at various points to experience things more directly.
Yeah. I mean, primarily you start out as one of, I guess now it's 6 races. Initially it was 4. Initially it was the big 4 man, dwarf, elf, hobbit. each of them starts out in a different part of Eriador, whether it's the Breland or whether the Shire or Thorin's Hall up in Ered Luin or the remnants of Linden over in Ered Luin, near the Ered Luin as well. And they all have their own sort of small, quaint little adventures that eventually all tie into we have a lot of sort of picaresque stories spread throughout the map as you go from place to place, but there's also an epic story that runs as a through line through all of it as your character advances. That involves, at the outset when we first launched, we just launched with Eriador, and that was the Shadows of Angmar title, the initial launch of the game. So that story had to do with the unspoken, the untold story of what the Rangers were actually trying to protect everybody from, and the attempt by Sauron to bring back the realm of Angmar to assist him in his war, and this is all the stuff that conveniently is not mentioned in the books, but that happened, that we assume happened off camera, and your character was instrumental in dealing with that while the Fellowship was off doing its own thing. Mm-hmm. And then following that, that all sort of came to a head, and that tale more or less ended when we got to Eregion. And then we picked up another tale through Moria, mm-hmm. and into Lorien, Mirkwood, and also through Dunland into Isengard. And then at a certain point, we wound up. At that point, we were able to hook up more overtly with the Fellowship, or at least with the part of the Fellowship that wasn't traveling in secret, trying to do the big secret thing. We didn't want to have everybody tail Frodo.
Yeah. Nobody wants to tail Frodo. No.
Yeah. But we, there's a lot more opportunity to hook up with the Aragorn, Gandalf, other hobbits, all of them, as we moved through Rohan and then through Gondor and all the way to Mordor. And so the story at that point sort of was working in whereas the first few couple portions of the story were much more I don't want to say they were at least geographically separate from what the Fellowship was doing. We were then following along with the Fellowship in the last stages of the War of the Ring, assisting them, going basically like fighting all the battles that they couldn't because they couldn't be everywhere at once. And also, like, defeating, facing enemies that we had been pulling through the story of our own creation.
It's worth noting, for those who maybe are less familiar with the Lord of the Rings Online, is that the game did launch in 2007, and it's now 2019, so we've had 12 years of active development on world building in the landscape. And so as such, it's a bit of a maybe marketing phrase, but when we say explore Middle-earth, I mean, we really do take that pretty darn serious.
Well, yeah, I mean,
and there's a ton to see.
Yeah, we just hit a big milestone where we when we launched the Vales of Anduin, where I could now say you can, with one point when you actually have to teleport between different sections of the world, you can essentially walk the length of the River Anduin from Carrick to the sea.
Yeah,
which, I never thought we'd get that far, but we, and as we add new sections to the game, we get to push the story forward. And now we're into the aftermath of the War of the Ring. The ring has actually gone in to the fire, and Sauron has fallen, and now we get to play with what happens next in the sort of as the Age of Men approaches, and the remnants of Sauron's armies are all fighting one another for dominance of the scraps, and other forces, stuff has happened in the east, and we have all sorts of plans for stuff in the future that we get to look at what's going on with the dwarves up in Rovanian, and just recently really bring the Beornings into it, and continuing to push the story forward into as things sort of move toward the Fourth Age.
Well, that's great, and it's interesting, being that you're the sort of the second company that I've interviewed, how different companies sort of take different approaches and different entry points into the world. Cubicle 7, at least with their 5e stuff, came about it the other way. They started in Wilderland, right? And sort of worked their way around the other way. But you mentioned Eriador, and you mentioned how you kind of started in that general vicinity, and that's kind of where that was our entry point into the world. So the plot line for our story was that during the last meeting of the White Council, one of the things that came up was that some Umbarian pirates were coming up and had stolen some artifacts from Linden. And it was, they tasked Gildor and Glorian, which is where we get the Inglorian Bastards title, with assembling people, and some of the wizards were involved with this as well. Thankfully my players picked basically one of every race in Adventures in Middle Earth, and sort of they made their way from Bree up into. They started at the last bridge and they headed north and essentially went to Garthagarwen, where they met some of the hill people and encountered the the Red Maiden.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Naruhel, was that her name? Does that sound familiar?
Yes. Oh, very much so.
and eventually made their way up to sort of the island castle on Tolascarnan.
Okay. Yeah.
Am I pronouncing those correctly?
Tolascarnan. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So there, a battle was fought with the characters that we called the Battle of Rue Limdal, which was essentially the Battle of Wicked Secrets, where they discovered that there were more artifacts involved, and that the Umbarians were working essentially for the Shadow. And so that's kind of where our story started as well. And these places that you mentioned were just instrumental to us. Eriador's End, they had to decide between the Bitter Stairs and Eriador's End, and they ended up sort of trailing the Umbarian pirates through the mountains. And
don't climb stairs.
No, they're dragons, right? There's dragons there. So yeah, I just wanted to mention those. Anything that you want to tell us about those places, or anything to add about sort of Eriador?
Well, I mean, Garthagarwen was an interesting thing because that was literally born out of someone had an idea that we should do a red swamp, and I can't remember. It was a producer on the game. I couldn't tell you who at this point because it was so many years ago. And so that was that was one of our first real pushes into stuff that Tolkien probably didn't consider putting a red swamp in the Lowlands. Let's be honest. But it gave us an interesting environment and the possibility of bringing in a river maiden who'd gone bad, and gave us sort of a way to distinguish our version of Middle Earth early on, and the Blood Swamp turned out to be a pretty effectively creepy area.
It's a great idea.
It definitely established a lot of stuff that we moved forward with, particularly the notion of there being other river maidens, and some of them are friendly and some of them aren't, and we've brought that we brought that down into Gondar with the Five Sisters of Lebanon, and into other parts of the world as well.
So, a question about that, and then we'll move on. I know you guys probably have to go soon, but so you mentioned now that there are 6 races, and you've expanded that over the years. One of the things that we did for our campaign was sort of borrow, like you did with the River Maidens, borrow on Tolkien's lore, and I created a race called the Avathari, which were creatures of, so if you think of Ungoliant, who came from Avathar over in Aman, right, in the mountains, the shadowy region. the idea came to me that that Ungoliant probably wasn't the only one around, right?
Right. Yeah.
And that there were probably other shadow creatures who were probably weren't as far gone as Ungoliant, right? As in terms of evil and greatness. And so, is there any thought about opening some kind of like Avathari like or River Maiden like Maiar type, character race?
There's certain issues of balance that bringing like something Maya level into it. I mean, even when we introduced the high elves, there was a lot of question. Like, how are we going to make a high elf like not just the most awesome kind of character to play in the game? And for something like Maiar, I feel like that might be a little bit far to take it for players, for player characters.
Agreed. It's like trying to play an Adventures in Middle Earth campaign with like wizards, right? Like it just doesn't really work.
But I mean, as an NPC thing, we've definitely done a bunch of I'd say the equivalent. Maybe I'm not. Assuming I'm interpreting the Avathari correctly, our nameless in the game are they're sort of a catch-all of creatures of great power and unknown origin that like the ones that gnaw the bones of the earth that Gandalf sees when he's after he falls off the bridge of Tess of Doom. So we have a bit of that, and we have other races like the Gorzul, who were servants of Sauron, that basically the Black Numenorians that he pulled into his the mouth of Sauron that he pulled into his power post Nazgul. But as far as I'd say something like that would have some definitely some gameplay difficulties. Also, if they're primarily an evil race.
That's the point I was going to bring up, is that although we do allow players to, engage in that kind of gameplay in our PvMP side, for example, you can play as a warg and that kind of thing. For the larger PvE environment, you're heroes. And we do not generally have an alternate dark timeline or something.
And I even for something like PvMP, I would be leery of adding something like that to the creep to the MP side of the PvMP, just because it would throw the balance of all of that out of whack and make a lot of people upset, justifiably.
Okay. Well, so last question for you: is there anything that you're excited about? Anything that Standing Stone is going to come out? Any new releases or anything that's recently come out that you could tell us about?
Well, you heard Chris talk about the Veils of Anduin, which got released within the last couple of months here, and that was a pretty big effort on our part to. It was a lot of content. I don't know what's the right word. We are turning our attention later on this year to our next expansion. Our previous expansion was the Mordor expansion, and that came out in, if I'm doing my math right, 2017?
That sounds right.
So this will be our next big expansion, and we're going to Minas Morgul. And some related things, I think, as well. We can't really talk a lot about that.
No, but I'm super excited about it.
But yes,
we're doing all sorts of interesting story stuff set out there, and just being able to flesh out. I mean, I'm right now back at my desk. I'm just across the river from Minas Morgul, doing some work on stuff I can't tell you about over there. But just being able to flesh that out. We've really only seen Minas Morgul from a distance ever, both in the books and the movies and in our game. We've seen it from the other side of the bridge across the Morgulwind, but we've never really been inside before. So that's fun. That's fun to figure out, and it's fun because I built Minas Tirith. I was the one who built Minas Tirith back. Was that 4 years ago? I don't even remember anymore. And so to be able to do Minas Morgul now to sort of bookend that. Actually, I think I have the bookends. That's been a lot of fun.
And And we're going to be saying more about that later, probably late-ish summer, I would think, something like that. And you can find out more information about that by following us on social media.
Yeah.
And so what would that be? How do we follow you?
That would be like twitter.com/LOTRO, facebook.com/LOTRO. In other words, you can just go to LOTRO, LOTRO.com.
Awesome. Well, guys, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to do this today. Good luck to everything that you're working on.
Great. Thank you so much.
All right.